if you poke a bear, they might strike back. And maybe that's the key takeaway. The fact of the matter is for many Canadians, there's not much that they can do on an individual basis except boycotting, avoiding buying U.S. goods, or avoiding or delaying travel to the United States. And it looks like a significant proportion of Canadians not only are doing that, but believe that it is helpful or somewhat helpful.
Across Canada, a quiet but powerful wave of resistance is still rolling. Months after President Trump's sweeping import duties triggered a North American trade war, the boycott of U.S. goods and tourism has not disappeared. It is still growing. In supermarkets from Halifax to Vancouver, shoppers are reading the fine print on every label. Families planning winter trips to Florida are changing their destinations. Local stores now proudly display signs saying, "Made in Canada," and the message behind them is unmistakable. Canadians are choosing their side.
According to a new Nanos Research poll, 4 out of 5 Canadians say that boycotting American-made stuff or avoiding tourism to the United States altogether will strengthen our country's bargaining position in the ongoing trade war launched by President Trump.
According to a new Nanos Research poll released in October 2025, 4 out of 5 Canadians, roughly 80% of the population, believe that refusing to buy American products or avoiding travel to the United States strengthens Canada's bargaining position in the trade dispute launched by Washington earlier this year. Only 18% said the boycott is not helpful. What began as a policy fight between governments has become a movement of everyday citizens using their spending power as a form of quiet defiance. In a country known for moderation and diplomacy, this is a striking show of national unity.
When the Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, furniture, and auto parts in early 2025, the intention was to force Ottawa into concessions. But the impact went beyond government offices and boardrooms. It reached directly into households. The numbers tell the story. In February, new import duties ranging from 10 to 35% were imposed under U.S. national security rules. By mid-year, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the average input cost in the auto sector had already risen by more than 12%. For Canada, a country whose manufacturing corridor depends on cross-border supply chains, this was devastating. Factories struggled and border paperwork multiplied, yet instead of backing down, Canadians began to adapt. A consumer shift took hold. Older Canadians led the charge. 85% of those aged 55 and above told Nanos Research they support the boycott. Among those aged 35 to 54, 74% agreed. Support was strongest in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, where local industries have been hardest hit by the tariffs. What makes this moment different is the scope of participation. It is not limited to activists or politicians. Ordinary citizens, retirees, and small business owners are joining the movement. Even travel data shows a tangible decline in Canadian tourism to the United States, especially in border states like Vermont, Michigan, and New York. Tourism agencies in those areas have begun warning of lower bookings and declining retail sales. A strategy meant to isolate Canada is now hurting communities across the U.S. that depend on Canadian visitors.
The boycott has turned into something larger than a consumer reaction. It has become a political signal. Trump's tariffs were supposed to pressure Ottawa by weakening its economy. Instead, they have strengthened the idea of economic independence. In practical terms, 3 consequences are now visible. First, consumer backlash. Canadians have internalized the dispute. Each purchase or canceled trip has become an act of self-assertion. Second, economic spillover. U.S. businesses near the border are feeling the loss of Canadian customers, especially in tourism and retail. Reports from regional chambers of commerce show significant declines in cross-border spending since the summer. Third, political momentum. The boycott gives Prime Minister Mark Carney's government greater leverage in ongoing negotiations with Washington ahead of the 2026 USMCA review. Public opinion is now firmly behind him. Data from the Nanos poll also reveals a supermajority effect. 54% of Canadians called the boycott very helpful, and another 26% say it is somewhat helpful. Combined, that's an overwhelming national consensus rarely seen in modern politics. The Trump administration may not have anticipated this. By using tariffs to project strength, it has sparked a collective determination among Canadians to protect their own markets. The White House expected economic pressure. Instead, it has encountered a surge of unity that crosses age, region, and political lines.
The ripple effects are already visible. For decades, Canada's economy was deeply intertwined with the United States, from auto parts in Ontario to grain exports in the prairies and energy shipments from Alberta. Now that dependence is being reevaluated. In response to trade uncertainty, Ottawa is encouraging a Buy Canadian strategy across public procurement while exploring new export partnerships with the European Union and several Asian economies. The government is also using this moment to mobilize U.S. border states, reminding them that Canadian consumers are vital to their own economic stability. Within Canada, the boycott has taken on symbolic power. It represents more than protest. It signals a shift in national confidence, that Canadians, as individuals, can influence the direction of trade policy through their collective choices. In a global economy dominated by superpowers, that sense of agency is rare. Meanwhile, for Washington, the consequences are growing harder to ignore. Cross-border travel is down, tourism revenue in key U.S. regions has slipped, and public sentiment in Canada has hardened. Each of these developments chips away at the soft power the U.S. once enjoyed across its northern border. In trying to teach Canada a lesson, Trump has instead taught Canadians something else, that resilience and economic loyalty can be a form of sovereignty. The boycott may have started as a small act of frustration, but today it stands as a symbol of how ordinary people can shape the balance of power in a trade war.
Become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free.
And you know, President Trump's back at it again. This guy's too much. He's out there back on his 51st state. Again, I'm going to ignore him. I'm going to start focusing with our federal government what we can do to be more competitive.
In the final days of September, President Donald Trump once again revived his familiar line about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. It was not the first time, and it likely will not be the last. But this time, the remark did not land as a clever punchline. Ontario Premier Doug Ford pushed back. Standing alongside Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, he dismissed the comment entirely and made clear that his province would focus on its own path. Lowering taxes, cutting red tape, and attracting investment are the priorities he highlighted. By brushing off the distraction, Ford positioned himself as a leader looking ahead, while Trump leaned on rhetoric. This moment was about more than just words. It underscored how Trump's tariff policies are backfiring in real time.
The real story is written in numbers. According to both Ontario and Michigan officials, the two economies exchange around $61 billion in goods every year. Ontario exports roughly $38 billion to Michigan, while imports total just over $20 billion. The auto industry makes this partnership inseparable. Parts and components cross the border 5 to 7 times before a vehicle is finally assembled in Detroit or Windsor. These are not abstract figures. They are the daily reality of factories, suppliers, and workers whose livelihoods depend on integrated production chains. When tariffs rise, the first pain is felt in Michigan. Governor Whitmer described a problem clearly. Agriculture and manufacturing are hit hardest, and Michigan embodies both. She compared it to catching a cold at the national level while Michigan gets the flu. The state cannot escape the impact, and the numbers prove it. Every escalation aimed at Canada turns back toward the American Midwest, disrupting jobs and investment. What was designed as leverage becomes a liability for Trump's own political base.
Do not too slow. Rather than trade barbs, Ford emphasized Ontario's economic strategy. He pointed to 1.8 billion hours of administrative burden already eliminated through regulatory cuts.
He reminded investors that Ontario has a pipeline filled with multi-billion-dollar projects ready to be announced. In an unstable world, the province is marketing itself as a safe haven. The message is straightforward. Companies seeking predictability and pro-business policies can find it in Ontario. Ford also extended cooperation beyond rhetoric. He invited Michigan's leadership to examine Ontario's development of small modular nuclear reactors, a cornerstone of the province's long-term energy plan. With a target of 16,000 megawatts of new capacity in the coming years, Ontario is positioning itself as a hub of clean and reliable energy for North America. This is not only about electricity. It is about sending a signal that Ontario is thinking decades ahead while Washington is caught in cycles of tariff threats. Taken together, the episode highlights a pattern. Trump's words are intended to intimidate, but they provide opportunities for Canadian leaders to showcase resilience. His tariffs are designed to pressure, yet they land hardest in states like Michigan that rely on cross-border trade. Meanwhile, Ontario turns the moment into proof of confidence, telling the world that it remains open for business. The backfire is evident. Every time Trump repeats the 51st state line, it no longer sparks fear. It creates space for Canadian voices to underline how deeply connected the two economies truly are, and how disruptive his approach has become for American workers themselves. For Canada, this is not about becoming a state. It is about showing that even in the face of pressure, it can strengthen its position. For the United States, it raises a harder question. How long can tariffs and rhetoric continue before they erode the very communities they are meant to defend?
And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free.
Canada does not shrink from global challenge.
Well, I disagree with anything that guy says. He drives me crazy.
At the end of September, two speeches revealed how wide the gap has grown between Washington and Ottawa. In Quantico, President Donald Trump stood before military leaders and celebrated America's new missile defense project called the Golden Dome. He described it as the most advanced shield in the world and then pointed to Canada. According to Trump, Ottawa wanted to join, but his reply was blunt: become the 51st state and you get it for free. Meanwhile, in New York, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand told the United Nations that retreat is not an option and Canada will not turn inward. The contrast could not be sharper. Trump frames tariffs and security as bargaining chips, while Canada insists on independence and global engagement. This is the stage on which the tariff battles are now playing out. Since returning to the White House in January 2025, Trump has rolled out a new wave of tariffs that even America's closest allies did not expect. Lumber, kitchen cabinets, heavy trucks, and branded medicines have all been swept into the tariff net. For Trump, these moves prove toughness. For allies, they send a message that friendship does not mean exemption. The administration argues that the strategy is already paying off. In his Quantico speech, Trump claimed that the United States attracted $17 trillion in new investment in just 8 months, a figure he contrasted with the lack of inflows under President Biden. The claim reflects the mood at the White House, where tariffs are seen as leverage to pull factories, auto plants, and technology hubs back to U.S. soil. Yet the economic picture is more complicated. Industry data show that roughly 80% of upholstered furniture and about half of cabinets sold in the United States are imported. Tariffs in these areas raise costs for builders, retailers, and households. Families already burdened by mortgage rates above 6% now face higher renovation costs. The short-term boast of investment is shadowed by higher prices and mounting frustration among partners. Canada's answer is to move in the opposite direction. Standing before the UN General Assembly, Anand insisted that Canada will continue to strengthen multilateral institutions and remain a stable partner in both business and security. That message reflects a clear strategy. Ottawa has accelerated trade diversification with the European Union, Indonesia, Mexico, and the United Kingdom. New resource projects in cobalt, nickel, and lithium are positioned as anchors for an independent North American supply chain that does not rely solely on U.S. approval. The Ontario government's September pledge of 17.5 million Canadian dollars to support North America's first cobalt refinery alongside U.S. and federal contributions shows how Canada is using global demand for critical minerals to build leverage. By presenting itself as a reliable, rules-based partner, Canada turns the pressure of American tariffs into momentum for new alliances. Instead of being cornered, Ottawa is carving out space to act on its own terms. Taken together, these developments reveal the cost of Trump's approach. The United States is projecting strength through tariffs and investment claims, but it is also straining ties with allies. Canada is not folding. It is using the moment to reposition itself as a defender of international rules and a hub for new trade. Trump's line about Canada becoming the 51st state may have been delivered for effect, but it underscored how Washington sees tariffs and security as one package. For Canadians, that package looks more like a warning than a partnership. Tariffs can deliver headlines and temporary wins, yet in practice they risk driving allies away. The question that remains is whether this strategy will secure America's dominance or whether it will backfire by pushing countries like Canada to seek independence in the global order.